Coffee and Conservation is a place for agencies, organizations, and interested individuals to come together to share information and explore critical issues and other topics of interest to the Northern Nevada conservation community. Nevada Land Trust is an independent, nationally accredited conservation land trust working to protect special places and open spaces of Nevada for future generations. We have been in existence since 1998. We firmly believe that we are all stronger together. That's why we love coffee and conservation, and we welcome you here today. I am honored to introduce today's speaker, Superintendent James Woolsey of Great Basin National Park. And we have a second special guest, Program Manager Aviva O'Neill. Hello, Aviva, good morning. Who will say a few words following James's talk about the Great Basin National Park Foundation, the official nonprofit partner of Great Basin National Park. So let me begin with telling you just a little bit about James. He has 30 years of experience working at sites of natural and historical significance, including 25 years with the National Park Service and 5 years with the American Battle Monuments Commission. Before Great Basin, he was superintendent of both Springfield Armory National Historic Site in Massachusetts and Coltsville National Historic Park in Connecticut. He has served at national parks in the Washington, D.C. area, New England, Utah, and the California Mojave Desert. In 2006, he took an assignment in France with the American Battle Monuments Commission, which managed 24 overseas U.S. military cemeteries and 25 monuments located in France, England, Holland, Belgium, Tunisia, Philippines, Mexico, Italy, and Luxembourg. For 2 years, James was the Director of Visitor Services at the Normandy American Cemetery, and later promoted to be the Commission's Paris-based Director of Interpretation of Visitor Services for all 24 overseas cemeteries. He returned stateside, rejoined the National Park Service in 2011, and became superintendent at Springfield Armory in Coltsville. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from Humboldt State University and a master's in history from the University of California, Santa Barbara. I know James as the consummate professional he is, and it has been such a treat to watch him fall in love with the Great Basin. Kind of seeps into your soul. And I know that's something that most of us can identify with. And one thing is certain, that Nevada's national park, and to clarify, it's the national park entirely within the boundary of Nevada. So for our friends at Lake Mead, I just want to, and Death Valley, you know, we have to clarify sometimes. But we are so fortunate as Nevadans, as conservationists, to have him at the helm. So James, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with all of you folks. I definitely look forward to talking to you a little bit about the Great Basin and hearing what questions you have. So we'll save a little bit of time at the end for questions. So think about that. Anything is kind of open game. Can you hear me good?
You sound great. I will invite
Okay,
everyone to go ahead and mute.
All right, I am
Okay,
going to share my screen. So can you see that, everybody?
Try one more time.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yep, we're good.
All righty. So again, I'm James Woolsey, superintendent of Great Basin. Actually, I grew up in the Mojave Desert, so for me, this is more like home than a lot of the other sites that I've been to. But as Alicia mentioned, the Great Basin is a special part of the world, I must say. You know, I've really enjoyed it. And what I was going to do today, I was going to talk about 4 different things. So one is I was going to give you an overview of what the national park system and the service is, and I'm going to do it by kind of taking you through the parks that I've worked at as a cross section. Then we're going to kind of get into the meat of the program. We're going to talk about the significance of Great Basin National Park. Third, we're going to talk about visitor services and resource preservation. which are two of the main goals of the National Park Service. And then finally, we're going to talk about economic impacts at Great Basin National Park. So the National Park Service was created in 1916 through what we call the Organic Act, and it was a bill that formally created the National Park Service. And in that, it talks about our mission, which is to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in a way that will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. So for us parkies, that really is the key part of our mission. And you know, a lot of government bodies and any bodies in general, sometimes their mission is a little bit confusing, but for the Park Service, it's not. Our mission is to preserve our nation's most important natural and cultural places. And you know, the first national park in the world was Yellowstone National Park. Ken Burns has done a wonderful documentary of the National Park Service, and he calls the national parks America's best idea. I love to travel all over the world, and this idea of national parks has since spread to most nations in the world. So I tend to agree that it's one of our best exports, and it really is a marvelous concept. The idea that some places are so important that we should take care of them, and not just take care of them now, but take care of them forever. So where have I worked as a National Park Service ranger? My first job was in the National Mall. I was a park ranger at the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and the Jefferson Monument. Then I transferred to the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. It's an old 19th century historic site that runs for over 300 miles along the Potomac River. It's a fantastic park. You see those unfortunate fellows there on the left driving the mules? That was my first job. I was a mule skinner on the C&O Canal. Not many people can say that one. Then I moved to Lowell National Historical Park, which is located in Massachusetts. Lowell was America's first large industrial city. A bunch of rich Bostonians went over to England on a vacation. They saw all these big factories being built over there, and they decided to steal the technology and bring it back to America. They hired young factory workers, young Yankee farm girls, and then eventually discovered that immigrants were a lot cheaper and churned to immigrant labor. And Lowell basically became the model for large industrial cities and America's emergence as an industrial powerhouse. Then I moved out west back home to Mojave National Preserve. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in 29 Palms, so this was kind of going back home. Mojave is a 1.5 million acre representative sample of the Mojave Desert in the eastern Mojave Desert of California. Then I went to Bryce Canyon National Park, beautiful Colorado Plateau Park, located at 8,000 feet on the Ponsagat Plateau. I actually went back to Mojave for another stint, but then I was lucky enough to get a unique opportunity to work at the Normandy American Cemetery, where Americans who sacrificed for freedom in World War II are buried. And this agency manages 24 cemeteries around the world. So that was a pretty cool little assignment that I got to do. And this is the new visitor center that they built at the Normandy American Cemetery. And actually, I was hired to open this facility, hire the staff, and get it going. So that was one of the funnest sites I've ever worked at. Then I moved back stateside and became a superintendent for the National Park Service. I worked at the Springfield Armory National Historic Site. This is where the U.S. Army made guns, rifles, from just after the American Revolution to the Vietnam War. And additionally, this is another industrial history site. This was where precision manufacturing was really born in America, and they first perfected things like interchangeable parts. So the government was able to invest this money in perfecting these processes, but then other industries in America were able to profit from it. And so in the late 19th century, when America became the premier industrial power, the Springfield Armory and another site that I later managed called Coltsville National Historical Park were incredibly important. And Coltsville is in Hartford, Connecticut. It's where Sam Colt made the Colt 45, but he essentially took these processes that were perfected at the Springfield Armory and used it in private industry. And in fact, eventually, this area was where was a center of gun making in the world, and definitely in the United States. So, when you look at the National Park Service in total, it has more than 400 sites. It's divided between natural and cultural sites, and really, it's through our representatives in Congress, they have identified the most important sites that we should preserve forever, right? And one of those is the Great Basin National Park. Great Basin National Park actually grew out of a smaller national monument called Lehman Caves National Monument, and we will show pictures of Lehman Caves later. And that was done in 1922, so we're actually coming up on the 100th anniversary of Lehman Caves. But then in 1986, the park was enlarged and became Great Basin National Park. And the purpose was to preserve for the benefit and inspiration of the people a representative segment of the Great Basin. The park preserves a lot of incredible stuff, including an outstanding segment of the Great Basin National Park, old growth bristlecone pines, Lehman Caves, and other incredible geologic features, beautiful scenery, and 13,000 years of human history. All of it set aside to be preserved for future generations and to help us understand our past, which is really important. So that brings up kind of what I think would be the first question. Well, then what is the Great Basin? Well, the truth is there's several answers to that question. Colonel Fremont, who was an early American explorer in the 1840s and 1850s, he came out to this area and he discovered that there was a large basin, he called it, that was internally drained. Actually, it's not one basin, it's a series of smaller basins. But this area drains internally, which is very, very unique. Usually water drains downstream and out to the ocean. So this large area he named the Great Basin, which is the what it still is called to this day. However, people who have looked at the Great Basin have realized that it's a little bit more complicated than that. So there's an ecological Great Basin, and that's looking at the plants. The boundaries differ a little bit from the area of internal drainage. If you look at the ecological Great Basin that's mapped out here, you can see it's mostly Nevada, a little bit of Utah, a little bit of Idaho, and a little bit of Eastern Oregon, right? There's another definition which is based on geology, and that's called the basin and range. So over the last 500 million years, the West Coast has been this mountainous area, but in the last 15 million years, basically the West Coast of America has been stretching. You can see the Gulf of California right here, which is essentially where the West is being ripped apart. And the Great Basin, or the basin range, is the internal part of that, where the interior is actually spreading. So people claim that in different areas of the basin and range, the land is actually spread 50%. Some people even claim 100%. So that's another definition of the Great Basin. And here you can see a map of Utah, which shows the mountain ranges in Nevada. And again, all these are subject to debate, but Nevada is sometimes claimed to be the most mountainous state in the United States, and certainly is one of the most mountainous places anywhere in the world. Another way to define the Great Basin is looking at Native American cultures. The Paiute, Shoshone, Chemehuevi, those peoples shared a common culture and languages that were linguistically related to one another. And actually they more or less map out the Great Basin, right? And here you can see a map that shows where Native peoples live today throughout the Great Basin. So still a very critical part of the heritage of our area. Now this is interesting. So this shows a map of Great Basin National Park. And actually, if you look at it, you can see that there's a ridge of the mountain that goes through it. There's Wheeler Peak, which is 13,000 feet. But the park actually itself is really a small piece of the Snake Range. So one of the things that we can talk about is, does Great Basin National Park actually preserve a representative sample? Really one of the iconic parts of the Great Basin are these great sagebrush plains and valleys that exist everywhere. And in fact, Great Basin National Park has very little sage in it. So I think that's kind of one of the things that we could talk about and debate. But in general, the area that has been preserved is beautiful, especially the high elevation part of it. That part of it is definitely unique. And it goes from the 8,000, from sagebrush, which, where this photo is taken is probably about 5,500 feet, through pinyon pine, juniper at about 8,000 feet, up to Wheeler Peak, which is 13,000 feet. So that change in elevation is almost 8,000 feet of vertical relief, which, when I lived back east, I went up to go see, up in the White Mountains, and they have Mount Washington, which is the highest mountain range back east. And that mountain is 8,000 feet, and they think that's tall. It's like, they need to come out west and see some real mountains, right? The park preserves all kinds of amazing stuff, including the oldest trees on Earth, the bristlecone pines, Bonneville cutthroat trout, which is a native trout that was in the old Lake Bonneville from the ice ages. Lehman Caves, which I mentioned earlier, which is one of the most beautiful show caves in the country, and visitors come out here. But also historic stuff, like Johnson Mine Cabin, which was the location of an old mining area. And we also preserve dark night skies. The eastern part of the Great Basin is one of the darkest places in North America. And so we preserve those night skies so that everybody can see them, right? People love to come to the Great Basin. So our visitation is about 150,000 visitors a year. We have 2 visitor centers. This is the Great Basin Visitor Center down below. Up top, we have Lehman Caves Visitor Center. We do tours of Lehman Caves. We tend to average about 40,000 visits per year, although this year it's going to be a little different with COVID. We're not going to have as many tours. We are definitely a camping park. We have 5 beautiful campgrounds, and about 50,000 of our visitors camp. That's about a third of our visitors, which that's unique in a national park, right? There's the high country, so people love to get out of the heat in the desert down in the valleys below and come up and see the cool high elevation country. Again, hiking. Hiking is one of the most popular activities at Great Basin, and we're definitely a hiking park. There's good trails all over the place, and they tend to be a nice blend of trails that are, kind of good long day hike trails. So challenging, but good for somebody who's, lives in Los Angeles and doesn't get out in the wilderness, and they can come out and hike and challenge themselves but not get lost. Beautiful wildlife. Here's a big elk, but lots of other things. Like here's a picture of a mountain lion from one of our cameras at a water source. So lots of big predators that exist in the area. People love to come to the dark night sky. As this poster says, half the park is after dark. And what we're finding is that visitors come specifically for the dark night skies. So about 20,000 of our visitors participate specifically in our dark night skies. Through the Great Basin National Park Foundation and other partners, we were able to install the Great Basin Observatory. It's the only research grade observatory in a national park. We do an annual Great Basin Astronomy Festival. This is a picture of the 2019 version. Last year it went virtual. We'll be back live again. It's a great event if you get a chance to come up. We have all these astronomy volunteers, and they're a special breed. They're incredibly dedicated, and they come with these enormous telescopes, so you can really see the dark night sky. And this is just a fun little one. This is Eva Jensen, our cultural resource manager, and she was doing an archaeological survey and found this old Winchester propped up against a tree. It was manufactured in the 1880s, but who knows how long it was sitting out there. But if you look at the butt of the gun, you can see that it's weathered like wood that's been outside for decades. So some poor individual set his gun against a tree. Who knows what he went to do, but he was never able to find it again until we were there. Alicia asked me to talk a little bit about fire. We had a fire in the park in 2016, and actually this photo is interesting because the wayside shows what it looked like before the fire. And then in the background, you can see the fire when it was freshly burned. But now look at this. This is that same scene just a couple of weeks ago when I was up there. So this area that was freshly burned in 2016, by 2021 is actually way on the road to recovery. And in fact, Upper Strawberry Creek has now become one of the favored destination for our local elk herd. And looking at the grass, you can see why, right? And in fact, you know, a lot of the forbs and other species are recovering. Finally, I wanted to note it that you know, Great Basin National Park has important economic impacts also. So we get about 150,000 visitors. Those visitors spend almost $9 million in the local community, and those people support 121 jobs in the local community. So, you know, national parks are good for our soul, but they're actually good for the economy as well. So it's nice that they do a couple of things. And then finally, I wanted to show you this. This shows visitation at the park from 1933. So I mentioned the park was created in 1922, but actually for the first decade, it was managed by the Forest Service. In 1933, the Franklin Roosevelt reorganized the government and he put all national monuments under the National Park Service. And that's when we started doing kind of modern management of the park with ranger guided tours of Lehman Caves. So you can see from, you know, the 1930s through World War II, there are less than 10,000 visitors a year. After World War II, it went up to like 30 to 40,000 person range. But then in 1986, all of a sudden there was a big jump right there. Well, we've already mentioned what happened in 1986. That's when Great Basin National Park was created. So by creating a national park, it went up from about 40,000 visitors to about 80,000 visitors. But notice what happened about 2013. All of a sudden, visitation skyrocketed, peaking at about 170,000 one year, but plateauing at about 140 or 150,000 range. So you know, the park is growing in kind of its how famous it is in the world. So more and more visitors are coming, which brings opportunities and challenges. And so with that, I will stop so that Aviva can talk a little bit about the foundation, and then we can answer any questions that anybody has.
Thank you, James. So Aviva, welcome.
Hi, so I am Aviva O'Neill, Program Manager of Great Basin National Park Foundation. And I am also going to do a very short slideshow. So I will share my screen. And can everyone see that? I can't see you guys anymore, so just say yes if you can see that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm new to Teams as well. So we're the official nonprofit partner of Great Basin National Park. I put our mission up here on this slide, but I would say to say it more succinctly, our purpose is to connect the public to Great Basin National Park. So its spectacular wonder can be protected far into the future. And we're doing this in many, many ways. And I'm just going to briefly show a few of those right now. One of them is through advocacy. So we recognize that in order to protect Great Basin National Park, that might mean that we sometimes have to look outside of the park boundaries. So there's been some attempts to utilize the groundwater in the Great Basin for southern Nevada and southern Utah, and we've been part of the groups that have fought against that. So we have an eye towards what's going on in the surrounding area, whether it's water related or oil and gas related, and when needed, we are advocates for the park and for the Great Basin area in general. A lot of what we're doing is related to supporting park visitors and the public and that's both within the park and outside of the park. So James talked about the bristlecone pine trees, for example, which are some of my absolute favorites when I come to the park to go on the bristlecone pine trail. You know, the oldest living organism on planet Earth. And the wayside exhibits on that trail were old. The information was somewhat outdated, and there was even some signs, interpretive signs that were vandalized. So we're replacing those this summer. Very excited about that with new beautiful wayside exhibits. That Winchester rifle that he showed in a slide, we supported a new exhibit that holds that in the Great Basin Visitor Center. And the foundation actually helped to get that Great Basin Visitor Center and a bunch of the exhibits there. Another thing we accomplished last summer was the installation of this bronze relief map, one of the overlooks in the park that helps the visitors visualize a lot better what that Wheeler Peak cirque looks like, and helps the interpretation and the kind of the connectivity between the park visitor and the resource. And I also put a picture here of search and rescue because we're also supporting different park programs that happen. So of course, the health and safety of the visitor, we've been supporting the park through purchasing of needed equipment and helping with communications in the backcountry. James also showed some slides about the Astronomy Festival. I don't think he showed one of the BioBlitz, but check out the BioBlitz. That is so cool, a citizen science that you can participate in that happens each summer at the park. So we help support those activities too. But I said that we are doing outreach and education within the park and also outside of the park boundaries. So the park really wants to reach out beyond its boundaries, but it doesn't have the capacity to do so with the current staffing levels. So together we're creating a lot of education and outreach that the foundation is delivering. So we go into classrooms that are in the communities surrounding the park. Some of them are rural one-room schoolhouses. Some of them are bigger schools, and we've developed a whole bunch of curriculum that is allowing the students to connect to the place that they live. I mean, really learn about science through that place-based education, and hopefully growing the next generation of land stewards, because we want to make sure that people that are surrounding the park and people really everywhere have this opportunity to get to know it, even if they aren't coming there in person. And so that is, we're doing that through elementary, middle, and high school, and also to the general public. But a lot of our education outreach thus far has been focused on dark sky preservation, because like James said, the dark skies in Great Basin are so special. And the foundation did fundraise and construct the Great Basin Observatory. Now we operate that as a key entity in a group, a cooperative of partners. So we have partners that are universities that are kind of circling the Great Basin. This is the first and only research grade astronomical observatory in a national park. And it does a really good job of inspiring the public to understand that research and education and dark sky preservation are so important. And a place like Great Basin is kind of the icon of that type of effort in the United States. And we would love for you to join us. Nevada's, Jewel National Park. It's Nevada's own national park. So we call our members Guardians of Great Basin. And you can learn more by going to the websites, greatbasinfoundation.org. We'd love for you to learn more about the Great Basin Observatory that has its own website. And there are a whole bunch of resources for educators on that. So if you know any teachers that could use some new curriculum, there's about 50 lessons available there. And I would be very glad for you to join our newsletter, our e-newsletter. We only send out about 6 of those a year, so I promise we won't bombard you. So you could go to the website and sign up, or you could, I put our email in there if you want to just contact me with any, to say you want to be on the newsletter or with any questions, please feel free to do so. And let's see. I can stop sharing here. I think I have to.
Thank you, Aviva.
Yes, if I can figure out, can you make me stop sharing? I can't see how to.
Push the little square with the arrow next to the leave button again.
Okay, there we go. All right. Well, thank you for having us here today, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. So to ask questions, please, you can type them in the chat, or you can go back up to the little happy face with the hand icon and raise your hand. But to kick off the questions, James, can you talk just a little bit more about the impacts of COVID, as well as the significant increase to visitation, and a little bit more about the challenges that you're experiencing as a result of that?
Sure. So, as you can imagine, COVID has been one of the most interesting challenges of my career, I got to say. Trying to deal with this and dealing with staff who, kind of range, all the political persuasions and all the, kind of all the attitudes people have towards this are manifested in my staff, which has been interesting. And then visitors who, early in the pandemic, they weren't coming at all. And that posed problems because we fund some of our positions by the fees we collect in caves and camping. So that had a big impact. Then by October, we were busier than normal. And actually, I just got stats for April, and we were up about 15 to 20% over 2 years ago. So before the pandemic. So very, very interesting. It seems like, as far as visitation goes, we are emerging from COVID, and I would say okay condition. Again, I think the staff and our leadership has done a fairly good job in a challenging situation. We did lose about $200 and something thousand in revenue, and so because of that, we are down interpretive staff about 40%. So we have reduced the number of cave tours we're given this year. We're only going to give 6 a day. And actually, normally we have 2 visitor centers open. This year, only 1, because we just don't have enough staff to staff them. Another interesting facet of COVID is we're getting increased visitation, and it's people who don't traditionally go to national parks. And to the kind of what I think they are people who normally would fly somewhere and take a vacation, and now they are coming to parks instead, which is great because we're promoting a new generation. We're getting them excited about the outdoors. One interesting little tidbit, though, is we have had many more search and rescues because people go out and don't know what they're doing and get lost. So actually, the foundation has helped us on that by donating money for a repeater and search and rescue stuff. More generally, about Alicia's second question about an increase in visitation, that is a really interesting one also. So on the one hand, it's great that people love Great Basin National Park and more have found out about it. And when threats exist to Great Basin National Park, we have more people who love us and will go out and work to protect us. On the other hand, it's always challenging to have more and more people. And I think, you'll see that like if you go to Zion National Park or Joshua Tree National Park and some of these parks that have millions of visitors and are kind of sometimes overwhelmed with visitors. So, Great Basin, we have a smaller land base and really we don't have the infrastructure to really hold 2 million people. So in some ways, it's good that we're not as busy as some of these other parks because I think it would lose its charm if it was really, really busy like some of the other ones are. So, managing a park is always a balancing act between, preservation, visitor enjoyment. There's always a challenge.
And for those of us who love to visit also. There's a new situation with camping reservations. I think that, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And actually that even was before COVID. When I arrived here, I noticed that visitation had really increased quite a bit. And Great Basin had been for the longest time, because we had so many campgrounds in relation to the number of visitors, that really most times you could just show up, go grab a campground, and it worked great. But starting when visitation got busier, we the campground started filling up, and what we found is, people are driving so far to get here. It was a bit challenging for them to show up and realize, oh, the campgrounds are full. So starting this year, we have instituted a reservation system for two of our most busiest campgrounds, and that's Lower Lehman Campground and Upper Lehman Campground, and then also for Gray Cliffs, which is the group campground. For now, Baker Creek Campground is on first come, first serve. And then actually our highest campground, one of the prettiest in the system actually, is the Wheeler Peak Campground, and that is being renovated this year. We hope to have that finished, open next year, and that will be on reservations also. And then by extension, the cave tours, those went on reservation a couple of years ago, and now all of them are on reservation, and that seems to be working pretty well.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. Carlo is asking about if you have any thoughts on unpaved cycling trails in the national parks. What is the position of Park Service and of Great Basin?
So our trails are non-road, hiking trails are closed to bicycles. So and dogs actually. So that's kind of another one where, if you go on Forest Service or BLM land, usually there's much less restrictive on that. However, we're working with White Pine County. There's a new tourism director, Kyle, who is very much promoting mountain biking on some of the lands around the park. So there are hundreds and hundreds of miles of potential places to go mountain biking around Great Basin National Park.
Including the new Discovery Trail that I've heard about that's going to be heading up from, I guess, the Baker Visitor Center through Nevada Land Trust property toward the park. I would imagine, since that is not on Park Service property, that will be open too. And Carlo, I've got some good ideas on some of the roads around the park, and I'm happy to share some thoughts on some really great rides.
Yeah. Well, and one other idea on that is if you park, near where the dirt road's cut off of the main road, park your car, get on your mountain bike, hike up to the mountains, and eventually you might get to a point where you just lock your bike up and go hike up the mountain somewhere. So you can make some combo hikes.
Thank you. Mike is asking when you expect the Wheeler Peak Campground to be open again.
Yeah, so we are working on that project right now. That was a nearly $5 million Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act funded project. So we have been working on that project. It's a 5-year project. We're on the last year of that project. So it runs out. We need to have it completed by December of this year, and that's our goal. So this year, the contractor is going to finish paving. Park staff have to go reinstall rehabilitated picnic areas, picnic tables, campfire rings, signage. We're going to rehabilitate the site because we had to dig up some plants, and so all that will happen throughout this summer, and then next year. And whenever we get the road up to Wheeler Peak, which usually is in May, or if we have a snowy year in June, is when Wheeler Peak will open next year.
2022. Thank you. Can you or Aviva share some of these upcoming dates, like the 100th anniversary of Lehman Caves and the Star Fest? Do you have any of those dates for 2021?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share the earlier ones. So the Great Basin Observatory is generally closed to the public that was when it was constructed, that was how it made the most sense to have it be situated in a national park. But once in a while, it is open to the public. During the Astronomy Festival, we usually do a tour, and then we are doing a 5th anniversary celebration this summer. So that's August 14th in the afternoon from 1:30 to 3:30. We're not advertising that widely, but for this small select group of people, we would love to invite you to that. I think Starfest is probably going to be just a closed event, Alicia, with the researchers. So then I'll turn it over to James for that. There's going to be a lot going on for the 100th anniversary of Lehman Caves. I will say one thing is we're planning to do a virtual lecture series. So if you can only come to the park once or twice, during that 100th anniversary of the caves year, you might be able to tune in multiple times to the lecture series. And if you sign up for the newsletter, we'll make sure that you know all about that.
Thank you.
And I will add, we will have our Star Party Weekend Festival again this year. Unfortunately, I don't have the date written down in front of me, so maybe we can go find that and Alicia can email everybody. So we'll get that for you. The 100th anniversary of Lehman Caves National Monument is coming up. And in fact, the bill that was signed under President Harding, one of those presidents you don't tend to remember very much, but that happened in January of 1922. So actually we're about 7 months away from the 100th anniversary. But actually in 1922, when they did this, they celebrated in August of 1922. So we're going to do the same thing. So on the 6th of August, 2022, we're going to have a big party up here to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Lehman Caves National Monument, and really by extension, Great Basin National Park. And actually, I will add one other kind of in the future date that I've been promoting to people. On 14th of October, 2023, so in 2.5 years, there's going to be a solar eclipse that goes like 30 miles from Great Basin National Park. It's going to be an annular eclipse. So that's when the moon is just a touch smaller than the sun. So the sun will leak out all the way around. However, if any of you have been to an eclipse, and I've been to that one that we had like 5 years ago, there's nothing like it. So come to Great Basin in 2023 for the solar eclipse.
Thank you. And Aviva has posted some information in the chat about the Astronomy Festival, September 9th through 11th. Thank you for that. And there's a beautiful new amphitheater designed for the night sky programs that is courtesy of the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act funding, correct?
Correct. And actually, with the first program will be next week. So we're very excited about that. We had been doing our star parties in the parking lot of the visitor center, which was a lousy place to do it. This is going to be so great. It's out kind of away from lights, and actually have a nice view of everything around. So it's going to be wonderful.
And Aviva has also just posted some information on the Bio Blitz focused on reptiles. Yes, we have a number of biologists listening today who I'm sure are very excited. But it's citizen science, right? There's a spot for everyone.
Yeah, the idea with the Bio Blitz is, science can be done by all of us, and all of us can watch our natural world and make important observations that can help us how we take care of our planet, right? So it's very important.
Okay, let me look for any other questions. Sarah and Melissa, are you seeing any other questions for James or Aviva?
I'm not seeing any.
I did have somebody ask prior to the presentation about what the National Park Service is doing to address climate change. James, are you able to share?
Yeah, so I think I think we all understand that the climate is changing, and it's having real world impacts. A great example for us out here is fire. So, with changing climate, a lot of our forests, for example, are more stressed, and you're seeing downed trees everywhere. Snow melt is melting out earlier in the year, and so that is making our landscapes drought earlier in the year, and we're having these gigantic fires. And I think with the new administration, it's now a focus again with our federal government, and so there's a lot of talk going on right now about how do we plan for climate change. So how do we harden national parks so that when this change happened, and we know it's going to happen, so how can we harden parks? So for example, with fire, one way that we can harden parks is by introducing more fire into the system and burning things more often, so we don't have catastrophic fire, and so we can plan for it more often. Maybe we can educate people so that people take a greater interest in issues of our environment and things specifically like climate change.
Thank you. Okay, last call. Seeing none, I will again, James, thank you so much for being with us today at Coffee.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.
Aviva, appreciate your intro to the foundation. Thanks all for joining us, and hopefully we will see you in June for the next presentation. Somebody has a hand up.
Good. Oh, hey, I'll mention too, I put my email in the box. So if somebody has a question that they'd rather do by email, feel free to send me an email.
Thank you, James. So we'll close the presentation formally. So we're going to stop the recording, but if anybody has any announcements, please